a truly pan-Canadian endeavor, using expertise and resources from coast to coast to coast. It'll turbocharge our entire economy, create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, and open new opportunities for Canadian businesses at every link of our supply chain.
That's the promise from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the federal government announced it's moving ahead with the high-speed rail project connecting Quebec City to Toronto. Electric trains reaching up to 300 kilometers per hour. Now, yesterday's announcement about basically a $4 billion design phase, that alone could take up to 5 years. But it aims to cut travel time on the train downtown to downtown between Montreal and Toronto to 3 hours. It's our real pleasure to welcome Hayden Clarkin onto the program. For years, I've been following Hayden on Twitter, now X. I think he's a must follow if you love public transit and trains and rail. Hayden, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
First things first, why? Because you've done it before. Make the case that Quebec City to Toronto is made for high-speed rail.
Yeah, well, I think it's an easier I think it's an easier case today in the lieu of the events that we've been seeing lately with air travel to make a case for high-speed rail. But yeah, so really high-speed rail really works in those markets where you think, oh gosh, it's really too short to fly. You almost kind of feel stupid for flying,
Yeah.
but also it's too long to drive, right? And so those are like kind of your Torontos to Ottawas, right? Your Ottawas to Montreals, your Montreals to Quebec City. And so when you put them together, it makes sense. Kind of thinking like in stateside here. Boston and New York to DC. These are ones where people fly every day between these cities, but it's also kind of one of those things where it's like, by the time I get through security, by the time I get to my gate, I would have already been halfway there on the train. And then you take that time of, well, you landed in Montreal, but now you have to take the train or you have to, take an Uber to the center of the city where you're really trying to go. When you add that all up, it really makes sense to have high-speed rail. And especially in the Toronto-Quebec City corridor, which, as you know, is about 80% of the population of Canada. I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I mean, and I've been asking that question for a long time. I still, though, have some questions, and I'm wondering, on the surface here, from the announcement yesterday, they announced the stops, right? And I've seen some questions, with high-speed rail, the more stops, the slower it gets, right? Because that's the whole benefit of high-speed rail. If you don't stop for a good stretch, it can get faster and faster. So there's a couple of stops here. Peterborough, Ontario, rather small town. Trois-Rivières, Quebec, rather small town. And I just wonder if stopping in those small cities, does it actually make sense, or should they make it more of a Montreal to Toronto, Montreal to Quebec City, and stick to the bigger city centers?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm sure you probably know better. It might be just a political one because, Smiths Falls, I think, is a town of 10,000 people, and so it wouldn't really be suitable for high-speed rail. But also, when you kind of think of it, if you're a little under 100 kilometers, the stop spacing on high-speed rail is kind of negligible, meaning the deceleration and the acceleration from each stop is not too crazy. And so part of me, kind of what they did with California high-speed rail between San Francisco and LA was, well, we have all these, towns in between, these big hubs of economic hubs of LA and San Francisco. And so if we have some of these smaller tier cities, if you will, connected to an LA or to an SF, you can almost sleep in Smiths Falls and work every day in Ottawa or in Peterborough and Toronto. Yeah. And so part of me thinks it's more of an economic play there versus a travel need. I mean, obviously, Toronto and Montreal's rental market and housing market are absolutely crazy. And so when you're thinking about adding more housing, you can add housing in these kind of second tertiary cities, and people can then use them almost as like a bedroom community. But yes, I understand some of the choices were a little odd.
Well, I'll tell you, yes, politics, I'm sure of it, played a role, especially with how this country operates. But I want to ask you, Hayden, because, you've looked at these systems around the world, the stuff we see in Europe, of course, the stuff we see in Japan, and then, in North America. Doesn't matter which side of the border you're on. We've been so bad at this, right? Canada and the U.S. Why is that? Why have we historically been so bad at these projects that other parts of the world take for granted?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It is a chicken or the eggs situation. We have seen Canada, the United States, and Australia and the United Kingdom really suffer from what we kind of call like cost disease, which is really rearing its head of how can we not build anything? Like our countries really are having trouble building any sort of infrastructure, and it's obviously affecting us politically, our national security wise. We only built, I think, 12 naval ships in America, and China built 100 last year. So we really can't build anything, and so it really rears its head with high-speed rail. And my point to that is, I, as an American, actually had to go to Germany to study high-speed rail in my undergraduate degree, because there's actually no rail programs really in America and in Canada in which someone can really learn how to build, procure, design, and construction manage some of these places and these systems. And because of that, you have this chicken or the egg situation in which high-speed rail is so expensive because our country doesn't know how to build it from an institutional level, that we then don't build it. And then the countries that are continuing to build it, i.e. Europe and China, it's much cheaper for them to build because there's not as much of an issue. And so you kind of have this like chicken or the egg situation of, how are we going to do it? I will say, everyone talks about the bullet trains in Japan, which are a marvel, but the first Shinkansen line that they ever built, the first bullet train line that they ever built, was such a disaster, was so over budget, they thought they would never do it again. Wow. And now that they're the premiers in doing it. And they did that in the 1950s when we, well, so they have their leg up on us.
So I mean, yeah, and I mean that's an interesting historical point, right? So it's kind of comforting to hear that in Japan they can screw it up and go over budget, at least at the start as well. Now in this country, they're saying right now it's $100 billion project, Canadian dollars, I should add. So keep that in mind. But does that sound like, looking at systems around the world? Boy, it sounds like a lot of money. Are we overpaying? Is it too much? And they say the cost could balloon to $200 billion. What about the cost you see in this country?
Yeah, so I mean, you led with the point of that there's going to be about 5 years of design and engineering. For me, I think that's a little too long, but I do understand that they're really trying to get this right. One of the big problems we've seen, like in places like California with our high-speed rail, was they started without even having all of the land procured that they were going to use. And so like, you really want to make sure you're set up for success. And so I will say that even though I do think the 5 years might be a little long, I as long as you're front loading that engineering and really getting those like risks down, I think you're good. You see a project in like Toronto, for instance, like the light rail projects that have been really struggling, the contingencies on those budgets are almost 30%. And in other countries, it's like 10 or 15% of your transit budget for a project is for like risk and for kind of padding. Yeah. And in America and in Canada, we're about 30-35% in some cases because we just don't know. And so if 5 years, can shave $50 billion of risk off the project, I think it makes sense. It is a little high in other countries, like, in Spain and whatnot, you can get to about 50 million US dollars in the per kilometer. So it does slightly, it does vary, but for the Anglosphere, for North America, that's really not bad. And hopefully the next line I know people were very upset that, Kitchener, London, and Windsor weren't included. So, hopefully at that point we will learn what we learn. And, there's an economies of scale around it. And so, it's tough.
Hayden, listen, we're going to leave it there. I'll direct everyone. I follow you on X, The Transit Guy. You can find you there. You're on all of the platforms, by the way. I think you're a must follow. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. You all have a great day.
That's Hayden Clarkin, transport engineer and public transit advocate.